compassion is not enough. All of us have the experience of compassion, of moments when this screen of normalcy falls down and we see the absurdity of the moral situation within which we find ourselves and within which we may realize that we are implicated. The very common example found in Portland is during these winter months we walk around and we see somebody sleeping on the street. Set aside for a moment whether it's quote-unquote their fault, whether they are responsible, and just think about that moment when you see another human being sleeping in 20-degree weather as you're walking home from a delicious meal at the restaurant on your way to go back home to your cozy living room. And we realize, deep inside, we realize how absurd that moment is and how impossible it is that we should just simply accept what we see before us, that a society is willing to allow this to happen. And we have that, and we see clearly the tragedy of it, and our heart breaks a little bit. And maybe we stop and we give them something. Maybe we go to beyond just giving them $1. We go into a restaurant and we buy them some food. Maybe we share a kind word with them, and all of those things matter immensely. Those things in and of themselves can be lifesavers. But at the end of that, what do? We go home, and the next day, maybe we think, if we're really at on our best behavior, the next morning we wake up and we remember that person, and maybe we make a donation to a homeless organization, and then we go along with our lives. And I think that those moments are so precious and so important and offer such insight. And I think that if we look at the book of Shemot, we look at Parshat Shemot, this week's Torah portion, we can see that there are 3 acts of compassion, each of which paves the way for the redemption. If one of these individuals in the story did not have that moment of seeing the moral absurdity of the situation within which they found themselves, the redemption and the giving of the Torah never would have unfolded. And yet we find that it's not just compassion alone. And so I want to look at these 3 moments and encourage us to think about the ways in which this first Torah portion of the book of Shemot lays the groundwork for an incredibly important lesson in the story about what it means to have Torah values and what it means to live a life of Torah values. So the first one comes with the midwives, the Hebrew midwives Shifra and Puah. So these are 2 heroes of the story about which we don't talk very much because they're not main characters, but if they had not been who they were, we would never know Moshe and we would never have the Torah. So Pharaoh's decree comes down that the Hebrew males should be killed as soon as they are born, and the Torah just tells us that the 2 Hebrew midwives, about whom we'll hear nothing else for the rest of the Torah, Shifra and Puah, refuse to comply with this decree. So it says, Vayomer b'yodchen et ha'ivriot v'riten et ha'avanim im ben hu v'hamiten otov im bat hu v'chaya. So this is the order that comes down to them, which is when you see the babies being born, if it's a child, kill it. If it's a male, kill it, and if it's a girl, let it live. And the miyaladot, the midwives, feared God, and then the essential part, they did not do what the king of Egypt had asked, and they allowed the boys also to live. So let's think about this horrific moment in this story when this unbelievable, murderous, brutal, almost unimaginable decree comes down, and they have this moment of knowing that this is horrific and knowing that it is wrong, and knowing that they don't want to comply. But how many people have the strength of character to then refuse to comply? because, of course, they must imagine that their own lives are in danger, and let's imagine that they also had families and people who were depending on them and people who loved them, and Lord knows that they could be forgiven for rationalizing and justifying following Pharaoh's decree, because they might even have said to themselves, look, if we don't do it, he's just going to get somebody else to do it. Why would we endanger our lives and the lives of our families by not complying? But they take a moment of compassion, this instinct, this innate sense that they have that this decree is horrific and that the society that they're living in is asking them to do something impossible. And rather than rationalizing and accepting it, they take the next bold step and they refuse to comply. That then lays the groundwork in the story. Not only is it a moral lesson in and of itself, but it lays the groundwork for the birth of for the birth of Moses, because the very next thing that happens in the narrative is that Moses is born. And so it's their act that actually enables Moses to be born. So the next thing that happens is that Moses is born, and of course his parents don't want to protect him. They've had this. They have a boy, which is illegal now in this horrific regime within which they live. They put him in the river and they cast him down. And who should find him except Bat Paro, the daughter of Pharaoh, and she sees the boy. And then it says, v'tiftach. So she finds the teva that he's in, the basket that he's in. V'tiftach v'te'ehu et hayelad. She opened it and she saw the boy. V'hine na'ar boche, and the little one was crying. V'tachmol alav, and she had compassion on him. V'tomer me'aldei ha'ivritze, and she said, this is one from the Hebrew boys. And so then, of course, she takes him and she sees to it that he's taken care of. She gives him back to his family so they can wean him, and then she will inherit him as a son. So now we go from this first act of compassion and courage, which was Shifra and Pua, these completely marginal figures in terms of the society, who could be less important than these two Hebrews in the society in which the Hebrews are hated and loathed. These two completely marginalized and marginal figures have this act of compassion and courage. And now the story shifts, the spotlight shifts to somebody who is nearly at the center of power, Bat Paro, connected to the household of Pharaoh, and she too has this moment of compassion, and more than just the moment of compassion, more than just saying, "Oh, what a sweet boy! How tragic the decree that is in our society." She then goes to the next step to see to it that he is protected and that he lives. And now, of course, the next incredible moment that I want to focus on here that animates the rest of the story, because now she too has, so to speak, set the stage for the redemption, because now we have Moshe and he is being allowed to live. And so then the story shifts to Moshe, and I want to focus on Moshe's act of compassion and his act of courage, because we get at verse 11 of chapter 2, Vayhi vaymi mahem. So this is now after Moses is living within the household of Pharaoh, within the family of Pharaoh. Vayhi vaymi mahem, and it happened in those days. Vayigdal Moshe, and Moses grew up. Vayetze el echav, and he went out to his brethren. Vayar b'sivlotam, and he saw their suffering or their burdens. Vayar ish mitzri, and he saw an Egyptian man, makeh ish ivri me'echav, striking or hitting or attacking one of the Israelites from his brethren. And again, it repeats this word me'echav, his brethren. He feels a connection. He feels a sense of solidarity with his people. But here's the key moment. It's a feeling of compassion followed by an act of incredible courage. With any one of these three, with the Shifra and Pua, with Bat Paro, and with Moshe, we could see ourselves also having this moment of when, as I said earlier, the screen of normalcy drops and we see through the absurdity and we have compassion. But that is not enough. What they followed up with is a radical courage and a willingness to stake their lives and to stake their sense of what is normal and expected on their action and their willingness to disrupt and to insist that their compassion not just be hidden away and secreted away and live in the realm of the private where it can have no larger meaning, but they draw out that compassion, they draw out that love and with their courage, and they insist that it live in the world. And by so doing, each of them in their own way, two people at the margins of society, Shifra and Pua, one person with power and influence, Bat Paro, and then finally Moses himself, who takes this act of this sense of compassion and uses it to completely transform himself, to transform his world. And we find that each of these little sparks of compassion and empathy that we have probably several times each day, when we notice this or that thing in a news story, or we read something in a book, or we just look around in our world, and we find that those moments spark up in us, and we don't appreciate their radical potential, because when we open ourselves to them and we have the courage to act on them, we can transform our world and bring the compassion from our heart into a world that so desperately needs it with our own acts of radical courage. Shabbat Shalom.